Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this morning's session where we're going to be talking about people and property and how, if you get a really good blended approach to that, you can deliver a really great strategy, which means both people and property needs and delivering both purpose and profit. It's not often that a webinar brings together the themes of both people and property, but in today's business landscape, it's really important. In fact, it's inseparable. Together, they really form the backbone of any organisation's ability to thrive, whether it's in a place of growth, and we'll look at that, navigating recovery, or somewhere in between, and we'll look at that too. And as an employment lawyer, I really believe that people are the heartbeat of every business. They bring energy, innovation, and meaning to what we do. So next slide, please, Lisa. So today we're going to be discussing people, property, and how they form that backbone of the organisation's ability to thrive. I was looking at a survey the other day which said that we spend 75,000 hours in the workplace, which is either depressing or surprising. I don't know. What do you think? But either way, someone who starts work at the age of 18 and works full time until they retire will be spending that amount of time in the workplace. And therefore that in itself shows that we need to get this right. Now, property, when thoughtfully designed and purposefully managed, creates the conditions for people to do their best work. And so today, using the two angles of both people and property, bringing together experts from employment and real estate, we're going to help you explore and understand and hopefully bring some confidence to how both people and property drivers will really help you achieve great things with your property and meet people needs, and how the two strategies together really could and actually should go hand in hand. So next slide, please. So just a few, next slide as well, please. Thank you. So just a few introductions then. I'm Jenny Arrowsmith. I'm a partner in our employment team, and together with my colleague Sarah Ellison, who's an associate in my team, we'll be talking about the employment aspects, the people aspects. Also joined today by Will Scott, a partner in our real estate team, and Sarah Swan, who is a legal director in our real estate team. So it's quite a unique session where we're coming together with different areas of expertise. You can see on the slide there our contact details, and also if you wanted to scan on the QR codes, you can link into us and follow us, and we'd be really grateful if you did that. A copy of the slides will come out after the session together with a recording, and if you found it useful and think other colleagues would find it useful, please do share. Okay, next slide, please. We're also going to get a little bit of audience participation into the session today. So if you have your phone handy, it'd be really good if you could just scan into the code there, and you will be passed through to a chat called Slido. Those who've done events with us before will probably be familiar with this. We use it quite a lot. It'll ask you for a hashtag, and the hashtag code is people and property. And just in a moment, we'll be just asking a question in relation to that, and then towards the end, we'll be asking a question as well. As always, we welcome feedback as well. So one more QR code for you is a feedback form. We've put this together because of an occupiers survey that we did, which Sarah's going to talk about in just a moment, and really trying to understand the market and your views in relation to property. And I'll leave Sarah to explain much more about that, but also from a people perspective. And it was the themes coming through from that led us to do this session today. In much the same way, we welcome your feedback about how useful this event has been for you, what your current position is in terms of how joined up your property and people strategies are, and if there's anything more that we can be doing to help, be that in terms of legal updates that we put out onto the in our legal updates or such like, or further events that you want. We're here to help. And your feedback really matters, and we do genuinely look at each and every feedback form and reflect on it. So if you could spare a moment, we'd be really grateful. Okay, next slide, please. So at that point, I'm going to hand over to Sarah, who's just going to give a bit of context to that occupiers survey. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks, Jenny. So just by way of brief introduction to our occupiers survey, earlier this year, we partnered with a number of external organisations, and we surveyed over 500 senior decision makers on their thoughts for their future plans for their office space. And what we found out, as some of the key findings on this slide, is what you need from your property is largely driven by what's happening with your people. So in no particular order, more people are coming back into the office to work, and a lot of them are going in for 5 days a week. So it's not surprising that most businesses are looking to take on more space in the next 12 months. Many businesses cited costs as a major factor in defining a property strategy, which includes any changes to reduce environmental impact of the office. So, with cost at the forefront of people's minds, it fits in that more businesses are choosing to reconfigure their existing space rather than relocate, and many are looking to incorporate some flex space into their portfolio. And finally, one of the key drivers for office attendance is to build social capital. People want to collaborate with their colleagues and to focus on team building. So businesses appear to be opting for shorter term, low cost options that support their people needs. Property costs make up a significant part of the business spend. So now it's more important than ever to ensure that your property strategy is central to your people, so you're getting the most value out of your premises. And I'm now going to hand back to Jenny to talk about social capital and whether forcing people back into the office is really the answer.
Thanks, Sarah. So next slide. Before I do that, we thought we'd just first of all go on to Slido. So now's the opportunity just to jump onto Slido, and there'll be a question that we're just asking of you. You can see on the slide there, and just while you're getting ready, that we've put the results that Sarah's just talking about in relation to whether you're in a position of growth or reducing property portfolio. We just thought it'd be useful just to see where our audience is at today. So just give it a minute whilst that transfers over. See, they're starting to come through. Okay, so it always changes around, so I'm just going to give it a second whilst we get a few more in. Quite a lot of you actually come different to what came through on the original survey are saying there are no changes planned, which is great. We're going to cover that in today's session as well. And a lot of you are saying you're going to keep the same office space or reconfigure. So I'm just looking at the original survey results. And there is a bit of a difference there, actually, isn't there? In terms of less of you are saying that you will be taking on more space. So that's interesting. Great. Well, either way, what we're going to be covering today is both from a expanding and a growth perspective, but also from a reconfiguring perspective. And then we will finish the session just flagging a few issues in relation to if you were reducing your portfolio. But actually, from an employment perspective, some of those things also kick in if you were growing your portfolio but moving premises. So we'll just flag a couple of the employment law issues that you need to think about there. So that takes me on to then just looking at growing your people with your property. What I'm meaning by that is if you're wanting to bring more people into the office, if you're wanting to expand your property portfolio and bring more people into it, you're going to be looking at recruiting. So there's two angles there. And the key to sustaining growth from a people perspective is maximising the use of property portfolio to ensure that there is a place that they want to work, that the environment is right, wherever that workplace is. It's so much more than just delivering a space. It needs to be a catalyst for collaboration. It needs to meet wellbeing needs, and it needs to create a space where people can be productive. Companies that cultivate a workplace where employees feel valued and encouraged to grow, have a sense of purpose, see significantly lower turnover rates than those focused solely on compensation and benefits. And increasingly, surveys do support that people, whilst money is important, salary is important, people value these things that you can see on the slide extremely highly and will be prepared to move jobs even for less money if these things aren't being met. In fact, one survey from Gallup said that employees who are actively engaged at work are 87% times less likely to leave their companies. So from a people perspective, I would say ensure that in any people strategy, you are constantly reviewing and thinking about how you are helping your people feel connected in the workplace, how you are helping them form strong relationships with those that they need to collaborate with, how you can provide a supportive work environment where they can thrive so they can perform to their best, so they've got the tools and the skills that they need to perform, to line manage or whatever their roles may be. And the benefits and the way in which they're managed from a performance, and if they've got health issues, in the way that you're managing health issues, they're feeling supported and valued. Think about learning and development. I have certainly seen in the last 18 months a significant shift, which is a good thing, in L&D budgets. So support for training line managers to be the best that they possibly can so that they can get the best out of their teams. And think about your employee brand. And by that, what I mean is, to an outsider, what is your brand? Do you have a brand? When people hear of you, do they know of you as a good employer? When they come in or apply for a job, do they know who they're applying for? If they go onto your website, what are they seeing? What does that tell you about the type of organisation you are to work for, not just as an organisation who delivers a particular service or such like? We know that this is really important to recruit. We know it's really important to retain staff. And if you are growing your business, these are things that you absolutely need to think about. And it's pivotal really to any growth strategy on a property portfolio, because there's no point growing your property portfolio if you can't bring your people with you. And you can see also on the left-hand side of that slide that another statistic that came out of our survey was that over 46% of businesses surveyed said they were already incorporating workplace environment and design into their wider employment strategy in order to support attraction and retention of staff. And my colleague Sarah will pick up on some of the detail of how you can bring together some of the things from an employment perspective into that strategy to help achieve a number of those aspects. Next slide, please. If you get this right, you get employee engagement. If you get that right, we know that that improves productivity, and in turn that increases profitability. So to that end, it all joins up. People and profit link up together. Next slide, please. So Sarah mentioned about a trend that was reported through the survey of coming back into work, and I think you mentioned 5 days a week. And you can see on the slide there are organisations that are pushing for a 5-day a week return to the office. I just wanted to spend a few moments commenting on that in terms of this trend of is there a massive pushback to return to work in the office, or is it still the state of play that we have a need for hybrid working? I think it's fair to say that since COVID 2020, when we started seeing a lot more at-home working, we are definitely seeing a shift back into the office. My own views is that there isn't a shift back to fully 5 days a week, but there are certainly some organisations that are very much moving towards wanting much more presence in the office than not. And I work with a lot of clients in the education sector where they're still very much in person in the organisation as opposed to home working. Now, 72% of businesses have said that the number of employees now working in the office had increased over the last 12 months, and I think that is right. I know of a lot of organisations that are having more fixed days of work where they want people to come into the office to collaborate, certainly over 2, 3, potentially more. But 74% when surveyed had said that they expect those numbers to continue to increase over the next 12 to 18 months. So I suppose from that it follows that if that is your intention and you've got reasons why you wanted to bring people back into the office, you've got to make your property portfolio fit for that, and we'll come on to the reasons why. Will it be the end of working from home? No, I don't think so, not necessarily. But is it the case that we are wanting to attract people back into the office and there's benefits of doing so? Yes, I think that is the case. So next slide, please. So I think you need to think about, why do you want employees to return? Is it to fill existing space, or is it to create a culture of being present, being seen, or collaborating? And they're very distinct things. being present together with colleagues can achieve some of those things I've just talked about from a good attraction and retention perspective, helping form close relationships and support collaboration. And we know collaboration is really, really key. But we need to be really careful of doing it just for the sake of a will to fill a property space. And for the reasons we'll go on to explain, I think there's a danger that if you're not linking up your people strategy together with a strategy to fill people's space, you could be exposing yourself to some risks from discrimination and such like, and that's something Sarah's going to cover. And being seen again, there's a real risk of this divide of those that are in, they're in and they'll get the opportunities, and those that are not in the office and working in a hybrid way, they will get less opportunities, and that itself has some risks which Sarah will touch on. So you can see on the slide there's a couple of comments there from Starling Bank and from Asda, both of whom have been public in their wish to increase people being back into the office. Now, Starling Bank talked quite openly about the fact that they were wanting to do that to achieve what they described as greater collaboration, which they felt benefited customers. That's great, and it was part of their growth strategy. A couple of things really on that is, it recognised that people managers also needed to be able to provide additional support to colleagues who, for their own personal needs, may need fully remote or some flexible arrangements, and nothing they were planning to do in their strategy was going to undermine that. They also commented that they were aware that in some office locations they weren't actually able to accommodate what they wanted to achieve, so they didn't actually have the space. So again, that's another reason why, if there's a reason from a people perspective why you want to bring people more in, you've got to work with your property team to make sure that the space is fit for purpose. The other thing I'd just comment on that is just question why you're so confident that it is going to be good for collaboration, and make sure that you're designing and driving your business and your property needs aligned to what you're wanting to achieve. It's very easy to say this about collaboration, but if actually it doesn't help deliver it, it could have the adverse effect and be quite a disengaging thing for staff. Okay, so next slide, please. But there are some wider benefits, and you can see on the slide we've just picked some of those benefits out to working in a physical office space with colleagues. So there might be some employees who have difficulty keeping work and home life separate, so they don't have the same boundaries, and that can be a wellbeing point in relation to them. So having that separation can be really useful. Some might have unsuitable home working environments, and some may experience isolation. And whilst their preference might be to be isolated, that might not be the best thing for them. So working with them from a people perspective can be really useful to try and encourage some in-person working. In one survey, 42% of employers believe that the main reason for attending the office was social capital, something that Sarah had mentioned. And social capital is really the desire for increased collaboration and working together to achieve more, so team building and such like. There definitely is something in that. And we're seeing more and more workspaces built around providing those collaboration areas and open space planning. And then, of course, better IT and better working environments might be more achievable in a physical workplace setting, all of which are good reasons why we should be looking at the two together. Next slide. But just a word of caution, Sarah's going to go on and explain about some of the statute rights that people have to flexibility, which might mean that you can't necessarily just mandate a full return to the office and to work in particular areas. And actually, the surveys that we've seen and talking to recruiters, there's some strong themes coming through in terms of, whilst employers may be quite wanting to put people back into the office to maximise their property portfolio, employees might be saying something slightly different. There's quite a lot of surveys around this, but you can see I've mentioned Starling Bank already, and there was a headline about Starling Bank staff threatening to resign after that same call for more time in the office. About 3 years ago, there was something called the Great Resistance, which was when we first started seeing people wanting to come back into the office more and more from an employer's perspective, and how employees were moving with their feet, so to speak, by saying, I don't want to work there if that's what we need to do. And in fact, I think that's still largely a trend. So if people feel that they're not given a choice, or feel that they are being are naturally forced to go back into the office where that's not actually going to help achieve any benefits for them in their work, and they could become disengaged and therefore want to move. So I think all in all, we just need to be talking to our staff and being really, really clear on our communications, really clear on the benefits, of which there are some, and really focusing on ensuring that the way in which we're setting up our property space is really aligned to ensuring that we make it a really good thing for our people. Just one more thing I wanted to flag on this. You can see on one of those headlines there that it talked about women and some parents are showing the strongest. And that again goes on to some of the things that Sarah will be talking about from a discrimination risk perspective. And then from an age perspective, what we do know is younger workers, so these are the workers of the future, they're particularly resistant to stricter office requirements. Now, actually, they do like to be in the office generally, when we're looking at the statistics around the different generations, but they also really value a level of flexibility, with about 30% of current 18 to 24-year-olds expressing an intention to leave roles if they're forced to work 5 days a week in the office. What we're ultimately needing is a future of work that's flexible, mindful, inclusive, and evidence-based, and a policy that really reflects the two. So now I'm going to move on from this and pass over to Sarah, who's going to talk about expanding our property portfolio. And I really do emphasise that with a good blended approach between the two, you can achieve all of these things that we've been talking about. Sarah.
Actually, I think this one's actually you.
Sorry, Will.
Before Sarah talks and starts talking about looking at property portfolio from a growth perspective, we just really wanted to flag the property life cycle to you and to briefly explain what it is if you've not come across this concept, and to explain why it's important. So the property life cycle is, as set out on the slide here, it is basically the life cycle of the property from beginning to end. So we're looking at it from stage one, where you are identifying the site that you are going to occupy. You're looking around, seeing what type of property you want, where you want it, what the amenities are, and whether or not this would work for you. You then move into stage two, which is essentially the acquisition phase. So this is either buying or leasing the property and making sure that you're setting it up for the right way in which you can then occupy in the future. The key stage, obviously, and the longest stage of any life cycle is going to be the occupation phase. This is when you move in and you start operating your business from there. There will be various events and changes throughout the lifetime of your occupation, one would hope, and you would constantly review it. And then finally, the disposal phase, where you're looking at getting rid of the property. This is when you're dealing with things like dilapidations. And the reason why we wanted to really flag the life cycle to you is because this will anchor your strategy. It anchors and frames the entirety of your property strategy, because at any given point, any organization is somewhere on this life cycle. And where you are on that life cycle will help to determine what you can do, when you can do it, and how long it's going to take. So you really do need to center any property strategy around the life cycle. And as Jenny was saying, your property and people strategy really need to be aligned. So your people strategy also needs to take account of where you are on this life cycle. And one of the reasons for that is that, as with your people strategy, and as Jenny was saying earlier, you need to constantly keep your people strategy under review. You need to constantly keep your property strategy under review. And there's this sort of stay versus go decision that anyone who works in property will probably know quite well. This is the question that you will constantly ask yourself throughout the life cycle of the property. Should I be staying here, or should I be moving to somewhere else? And that question is it sounds maybe a bit simple, but it's actually quite a detailed question, because you have to really carry out a detailed review of how is your existing property performing? Is it meeting your requirements? If not, can you change it, or do you need to move elsewhere? And in this day and age, we're demanding so much more from our property. It isn't just a place that you occupy and you go to work. It is a place that reflects your brand and your culture. It's a place where you can actually foster that culture, and you can also enhance your wider objectives, such as your ESG goals. So it really is important that you understand within the context of the life cycle where you are at all times. So that's all we wanted to flag about that. And I will now pass over to Sarah, who will start talking to you about the issues around growth.
Thanks, Will. So the purpose of this slide is to show how your premises can support your people in a growth phase. And growth here can mean one of two things. It can mean growth in terms of the number of people, or it can mean growth in terms of a business moving forward and developing to fit in with its corporate branding and its image. Your property strategy can help with both of these options, which might seem quite obvious. If you've got more people, you need more space for them. If you're looking to change your working practices, such as including hybrid working, you might need to adapt your space to accommodate this. But there are lots of considerations to think about with both of these options, as we've set out in this slide. So starting with taking on more space. Now, how might you go about this? There are a number of ways in which you can do it, each with different implications with timings, and all depend on where you are in terms of the life cycle of your lease. This is because you'll have more flexibility if you're near the end of your lease term, or perhaps if you have an option to break approaching. Taking the example of taking on new premises, well, here you'd need to factor in time to find a suitable property in the right location. You'd need to negotiate your lease terms, undertake due diligence, and also to complete the legal process. You'd also have to think of the logistics of moving people around. Might they be able to move straight from one office, or might it involve a period of working from home? Perhaps you might think now about taking on some flex space, which could be a good temporary solution whilst you have time to think about another move. It might be there's an opportunity to take on some additional space within the same building. And here you'd probably want to ensure that that arrangement was coterminous with your current lease. You really need to understand your existing lease terms to work out which of these options are available to you. And whichever option you pick will need to fit in with what best suits your people and also where you are in your property life cycle. The key is to plan ahead as much as possible so that your premises supports and links into your growth strategy. And remember, your premises can be such an important tool to attract the right people in a growth phase. It can really set the tone of your culture and overall brand perception.
So just really picking up from Sarah there and looking more at sort of changing your space to suit your changing business needs. It's a development of, for those of you who know about architecture, you may well have heard of a man called Lewis Sullivan. He was one of the founders of modern architecture, and he was very famous for coining the phrase form follows function. And what he was talking about there is that building design should be directly informed by its use, i.e. people-centric design. And this is very much where we're at now. And so looking at the ways in which, as you know, we've discussed, there are a change in the way in which we work. There's a change in the demand for the use of space and how we use it. So therefore, the form of that space needs to change in order to follow the function that we're now demanding from it. And so again, this really means that you've really got to understand, how are your people working and how will they work in the future? So this is a requirement to really go for internal and external stakeholder engagement to determine what those requirements are. And then you need to make sure that you can change your space accordingly so it can support and adapt and work with those people so that they can be in an environment where you're going to get the best out of them. And, you know, from a property perspective, this means you need to look at your lease again, as Sarah was saying earlier. Can you make those alterations yourself? Do you need consent? Will this require you to make alterations outside of your own demise, for example? You know, if one of your objectives is to really enhance your ESG credentials in order to attract more staff into your organization, and you're looking to lower your carbon footprint, You may well need to make changes in conjunction with your landlord. You may be making changes to the M&E in the building. That's going to be a completely different negotiation to just making changes to the internal of your own demise. So you really need to factor this into your strategy, factor in the timing, but really make sure that it is always at all times focused on creating the right environment that is going to enable your staff and your people and your customers and your clients to really get the most out of this premises. In addition, there are some other comments that we put on this slide in the middle in the yellow, and these are things that affect both if you're taking more space or if you're changing more space. And obviously one of the largest words there is finance. Any changes you are going to make to your space is going to be a cost to your business. However, it could be that you can actually use your premises to enable you to obtain financing. I'm sure you've all heard of green financing or ESG related financing. This is a massively growing area of the finance sector. And a lot of this will be based upon your organization hitting certain KPIs, predominantly based around the reduction of carbon, in order to avail yourself of a lower interest rate. So again, this is another function that your premises can help support your business going forward. It can enable you to achieve a lower interest rate in order to finance growth and to finance alterations to your premises. So it's really important that you actually factor this into your property strategy. So that was all we were going to say about the growth side from a property perspective. Can we move on to the next slide, please? And now we're going to talk to you about where there's sort of no change. So this is where you don't have any immediate plans to change the number of staff or to change the location in your premises, which interestingly, as per the Slido earlier, this is quite a common position for quite a lot of you at the moment. So I'm going to hand over to Sarah, who's going to start talking to you about some of the property aspects where you're in that situation.
Thanks, Will. Yeah, and this also reflects the results of our occupiers survey, which shown that this is a position that most businesses are finding themselves in at the moment. They're not thinking about implementing any immediate change. But this is not the time to sit back and do nothing. In fact, it's the ideal time to think about where your business is going and what your property strategy is going to be over the next few years. It's an opportunity to think about your objectives and to plan ahead. So as shown in the growth slide, you've really got to factor in timings when it comes to decisions around property. The processes involved tend to take a lot longer than they do around decisions relating to people. And you also need to factor in cost implications. So perhaps it's the right time to think about whether you should stay in your existing premises and maybe refit. Or maybe it's time to think about a move to a new premises. It's this stay versus go decision that's really important and requires analysis of costs, business objectives, employee needs, and future growth potential to identify the best fit for the business's long-term vision and operational needs.
Yeah, so just picking up again on a couple of points there. You'll see that one of the other main words or phrases that we put on this slide is stakeholder engagement. When you're in a period of, you think, as Sarah said, not really carrying out any big changes in terms of staff number or location, this is the real opportunity to really delve back into your stakeholder engagement and look at how are they working? How do you want them to work in the future? What are those needs? What does the business need? Is it hybrid working? Is it more return to the office? Is it some other form of a combination of the two? Does your premises actually support that? Because a lot of our clients are finding that, with the move back to the office, issues like Teams calls are becoming a massive problem. And also making sure that your operations have the right support in terms of the M&E. It's not just about physicality, but it's about connectivity. And really, this is the time to properly review that, and then again, look at your premises and go through that stay versus go decision. it's an opportunity for you to really also look at what are the key objectives for your business going forward, and will your property support that? This is, these are the sort of drivers of the property strategy and the people strategy that really do need to be linked up. And it takes time. As we've said, really one of the key factors with any property strategy is time. As anyone will know, property lawyers have quite a bad rep for maybe being a little bit slow. Taking on new leases can take time. Buying property certainly takes a lot of time. Carrying out the searches, getting the finance, doing all the due diligence. All of these take considerable amount of time, and therefore, whereas you might be able to make people decisions relatively quickly in certain circumstances, the implications of a property decision can drag on. And so you really do need to think about, at this time of no change, how can we bring that forward? How can we make those decisions now? And how can we get that ball rolling? So as when our people strategy does change, we will be in a position to support that. And it really is the key time. And it's actually the best time to do it, because you're not going to be reactive, you're going to be proactive, which is going to give you more opportunity. It's going to be more cost effective. You're not going to be incurring reactive costs in order to try and catch up with your people strategy. So I think that was all we wanted to really flag in terms of no change. And now I'm going to hand over to Sarah, I think.
Thanks, Will, and morning, everybody. So leading on from Will there in relation to combining your property and your people strategy, what I wanted to take a look at first was why it's important to take a blended approach to this strategy. So care really needs to be taken, not to be too fixed on focusing on in-person working for the sake of profit or property portfolio needs. Because the risk in doing this is that the company could then become exposed to some employment claim risks, which is why it's important to focus on a blended approach. So in order to create that blended approach, we always advise involving your HR teams. And the reason for this is they focus on people strategy. They know your people within your business and kind of what they're looking for and any moans and gripes. And they're the people that will be able to help with bring a people perspective to the planning and development of that strategy. And creating a good example of how a property strategy to fill space or reuse space may work from a profit perspective. If it doesn't work from a people perspective, then it's very easy to lose that profit with hidden costs of disengagement, or even worse, the expensive costs of claims and litigation, which, as Jenny's already pointed out, is neither good for profit or business outcomes. As it's such important that staff are not put to a disadvantage because of things like protected characteristics. And what I mean by this is people may want to work flexibly for different reasons. They may require flexibility in their working patterns because of things like their health issues or their care commitments. So to enforce a policy or to mandate a policy of working 5 days a week into the office potentially could put those people at a disadvantage. The issue with supporting a culture where it's viewed that it's important to be seen and there's a real need for a presence in the office can support biases, which again could lead to discrimination risks, because if it appears that work is being given to those that are most visible rather than the best person for the job, and that's linked to one of those reasons of the need to work flexibly because of health issues or childcare, then that's where the discrimination risks can arise. Often, as I've already said, people have their reasons for wanting to work flexibly, and it's really important that the policies around working in the office are focused around managing those, as well as the desire to have people back in the office. So, in short, if you want to mandate office days, it's something you can do, but we would advise that you exercise this with care. And what I'll do now is I'll go on to a couple of examples to illustrate how workplace planning can ensure that hurdles that people face because of protected characteristics shouldn't be a barrier to coming into the office if you look to design that office well. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to look a little bit more in detail at discrimination risk. So discrimination can arise if an individual is treated less favourably because of something called a protected characteristic, which I've mentioned a couple of times. These may be something that you're familiar with, but the law recognises 9 protected characteristics, and these are age, disability, gender reassignment, race, religion or belief, sex, sexual orientation, marriage or civil partnership, and pregnancy or maternity. So what this slide covers is some examples of the risk of discrimination on the grounds of religion and belief. And one of these examples is when employees may request access to a prayer room to undertake religious observance. So if that space is available and it's been requested for that purpose, to refuse that request could be deemed to be discriminatory because of that person's or that group of persons' religious or beliefs. Equally, on the other hand, what has to be balanced is employers mustn't, or they should not unintentionally disadvantage non-religious or non-belief workers by covering or converting a shared facility into a dedicated quiet room, because such action could be also considered as being indirect discrimination if it places workers who don't have the same religious needs at a disadvantage. So as you can see, it's a very careful need to manage, but it's important to recognise that consultation with your staff and with your employees can help balance that risk. So before making a decision how to design a particular room or a quiet room, consulting with the workers as to what needs they want would help to do that. Looking at a further example is in relation to breastfeeding. So discrimination can arise due to a workspace where an employee who's returning from maternity leave is breastfeeding and needs the facilities to be able to carry out and continue breastfeeding once they've returned to work. What this does is it raises important considerations for employers about the workplace, and this was considered further in a case known as Gibbons versus Cardiff and Vale University Local Health Board. So in this particular place, Ms Gibbons had requested a lockable room to allow her to express milk upon her return from maternity leave. And although her employer agreed, the lock wasn't installed ready for her first day back to work. And when she approached her employer and raised this issue, she was essentially just told to put a chair up against the door to stop people coming in, and also put a do not disturb sign up. And what happened was that when a risk assessment was completed, it confirmed that there hadn't been an appropriate place for Ms Gibbons to express milk, so recommended she use the do not sign disturb for the staff, was telling other people about her needs. However, the difficulty was that the office wasn't private, and colleagues would walk in when she was expressing, and a lock wasn't actually fitted to the room and to the door until 4 months after she'd 4 months she'd actually returned to work. The cost of that lock was only £5.50, but during her next maternity leave, she requested a lockable room to express milk when she returned. And whilst it was provided, the room then wasn't readily available for her. So what she then did is she brought claims, including allegations around the failure to provide her with a lockable room to express milk and harassment on the grounds of her sex. And those claims were successful because of the failings by the employer. And as a result, they had to pay a substantial amount of compensation. There is guidance in this area from the Health and Safety Executive, and that guidance states that suitable facilities for breastfeeding mothers to rest must be provided. It also goes a little bit further by saying that those facilities should be hygienic and private, so they can express milk if they choose to do so. I think there was a common understanding that it was okay for breastfeeding women to simply go into a toilet, and that was suitable, but that's not the guidance, and that's certainly not suitable. In this particular case, the tribunal made it very clear that in some circumstances, having a private office with a comfortable chair and a do not disturb sign may be sufficient. But as Miss Gibbons' employer had agreed that she needed a lockable room to ensure she had the privacy she wanted, then the tribunal found that they should have actually provided one, and it was a reasonable thing to provide. The exact facilities that somebody will need will depend on the needs of the employee and also the particular workplace. So before an employee returns from maternity leave, it's important that you discuss with that individual what their needs are and take any steps that they may need in relation to suitable facilities ready for their return and to be in place at the very start of the return. It's also important to highlight that employers are required to undertake a specific risk assessment for breastfeeding mothers. I think it's commonly known that when you employ employees who are pregnant, there's a need to carry out the risk assessment, but the need to carry out a further risk assessment for returning mothers who are breastfeeding often gets overlooked with many of the clients and the claims that we see. And then just a final note on that is that, just to add to this, is that once a woman has notified you that they are still breastfeeding, there should be a general assessment within your risk assessment, just to highlight those risks that could be to them specifically. And again, it's important that you really focus on the detail of the risk assessment rather than just applying a general assessment. Okay, so just moving to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the other area I wanted to touch on is in relation to an employer's legal duty to make reasonable adjustments for those employees who have a disability. So this arises where an individual with a disability can be deemed to be placed at a disadvantage by something called a PCP, so a provision criteria or practice, or any physical element of the premises, or where there's a failure to provide an aid that would take away that disadvantage. What we're also seeing, and as you can see from the stats on the slide, are the changes in the types of disabilities people have, and we see this in the claims that we're dealing with. So as you can see from some of those slides, looking at the neurodiversity in the workplace, we've seen a huge increase in claims relating to autism from 27 to 52, which is over a 96% increase, and very similar to cases for dyslexia, OCD and dyspraxia. A survey that was carried out by a company called Motion Spot revealed that 35% of those surveyed said that their work was affected by negative symptoms associated with menopause. And again, this is something else that we're seeing as a new concern or a new health condition, and that the way of reducing some of those barriers is by making simple adjustments such as providing rooms with fresh air, comfortable desk seating, more natural light, and temperature controlled spaces as well. So just going to move on to the next slide, please. And then the other area I wanted to just touch on in terms of potential risks when your property maybe isn't set up quite right is around flexible working. Flexible working, we've seen lots of changes in this area, including at the start of this year. So the beginning of April, we saw an increase in the right to make flexible working requests, because that changed to a day one right for employees, and also the number of requests that they can make in a 12-month period has doubled from one request to two. It's important that if you are receiving flexible working requests, that before you outright reject a request, it is thoroughly considered. It doesn't mean to say that you can't reject a request, but it is important that due consideration has been considered. There are recognised statutory reasons why a flexible request can be rejected, and this includes things like the burden of additional costs or detrimental effect on the ability to meet customer demand. It can even include things like planned structural changes. I won't go through all of them, but there's some examples for you as well. We're expecting to see the rights around flexible working to be increased because of the introduction of the Employment Rights Bill. And what that bill intends to do or plans to do is make it, is essentially going to say you can only refuse a flexible working request if it's reasonable to rely on one of those existing statutory grounds. So I think the important point to note from that is that whilst flexibility may involve looking at hybrid or remote working options, you can also look at flexibility around employees' structure and their time and their activities when they're in the office as well. Okay, so if we can just move on to the next slide, please. I'll just quickly touch on this slide. So this is a change that's happened very recently. So we had quite an important case regarding 4 Women Scotland, and it focused on the definition of biological sex. And what this case has essentially done is said that individuals are recognised by their biological sex, and therefore they have the right to access single-sex spaces. So when designing your offices and looking at your office space, it's important to take this into consideration, because even though this decision was made 9 months ago, what the Equality and Human Rights Commission are finding following one of its reviews is that many organisations still do not have policies in place in relation to this, and action is being taken to rectify that. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So just very quickly also is just to touch on a reminder not to forget some of the basics when designing and when thinking about your property space. They probably seem quite obvious, and if you think about some of the grumbles you hear in the offices, people will regularly grumble about not having the right temperature or technology not working, and these are things that could very easily be resolved, but actually can disconnect staff and kind of turn away from wanting to come back into the office space. And then if we can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So we've looked at property and people in relation to growth and maintenance, and some fairly consistent themes and opportunities for growth and maintain. But what about if you want to retract your space? What you're looking at is whether current office premises exceed your operational needs. So you may want to be looking at considering downsizing or rationalising of your property portfolio. From an employment law, you do need to assess how changes do affect your workforce, and whether that results in the introduction of potentially needing to move staff, in which case, if you're asking them to relocate or you're asking them to travel further afield, then you need to look at the specifics of their employment contract to check that they have relevant clauses such as mobility clauses to enable you to do that. The other thing to consider is if you intend to sell the building or move your business to a different site, then what this will potentially give rise to is potential redundancy situations. So again, you'll need to consider that. You'll need to consider how many staff are effective and whether or not it brings in legal obligations around collective consultation. But certainly that's something that we can support further on should that become an issue for you. I think at this point, I'm going to pass over to Will to discuss retraction from a property aspect a little bit further.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm actually going to pick up on the first part of this. But so you've just heard about retraction from a people perspective. And what this slide is showing is how your property can support at this time. So it's probably fair to assume that in a period of retraction, a business is likely to be operating in a more reactive than a proactive manner. So time is going to be a big factor. You're also likely to be thinking about cost savings. And a way of doing this might be to reduce your office space because you can save some money on rent, service charge and utilities. And retraction might also mean that there are fewer people to house. So again, there's the need for less space. This slide sets out ways you might manage the requirement to give up space and also the associated risks. So first of all, you've really got to think about what it is that you're trying to achieve. Are you trying to get rid of all of the space or just part of it? Because this will really impact the possible options that are available to you. All of these options will come with cost implications. So you need to weigh this up against the objective of saving costs. Taking, for example, the example of an upcoming break option, this would only be a viable option if you wanted to give back the whole of the property. It wouldn't work if you wanted to reduce in part. From a timing perspective, you'd need to ensure that you'd serve notice in accordance with the lease, which is usually about 6 months in advance. You'd also need to look at the break conditions in the lease. So what do you need to do to the property before you could actually give it back? Reinstatement works will take time and they'll cost money. You'd also no doubt need to think about all your rental payments being up to date, and there might even be a break penalty. So you'd have to think about these costs too. If you were looking to keep some of your existing space, you might want to try and think about subletting or assigning, but only if your lease actually permits this, and you'll also need landlord's consent. So again, you've got to think through the time and the cost implications. Again, remember that in a period of retraction, in terms of people, you'll be thinking about wanting to retain the right people. So you'll still want to think about how your premises can create the right environment to encourage these people to stay.
So just picking up on one other quick point when you're looking at sort of retracting your property portfolio, whilst it may seem like you are going to be saving costs by potentially downsizing, there is a risk, and the primary risk is that there will be some form of continuing liability. For example, if you're assigning your lease, then you'll be asked to no doubt be asked to enter into an authorised guarantee agreement or an ARGA, guaranteeing the incoming performance of the tenant. If you sublet, you're going to be inadvertent landlord of your tenant. So just to keep in mind that you're going to need to factor those costs in. There's also going to be another cost of potential dilapidations, which is a massive cost quite often. And so part of your property strategy, you really do need to keep an eye on those. But whatever stage from a property perspective you're in, there are 3 key questions that you will need to ask yourself. And this is the sort of big takeaway that we want you to take with you. The first question is, what type of space do you need to support your current properties, your current people strategy? And by that, we're talking about size, location, design, amenities, or anything like that. And then the second question is, if it's not the existing place, can you adapt your current space to meet those requirements? And if you can't, what are the implications of moving for your stakeholders and your budget? So really just keep those 3 key questions in mind when you're looking at your people and property strategy. And now I'm going to hand over to Jenny to wrap up.
Thank you, Will. So just before we close, a reminder as well to enter our feedback form. Feedback is really valued. And then just one final slide, really. We just kind of like to get an understanding from you, having listened into what you've heard today. What gets in the way of your people and property strategy being connected? This slide I will just invite you to do a free word text. So if you want to just write one or 2 words of the things that come to mind, it'll help us understand what are those challenges that get in the way between people and property and help us support you moving forward. And whilst that's just starting up, thank you very much for joining today, and thank you for your questions. We've got a few questions that have come through in relation to the issues that we've discussed, so we will get back to you in relation to those, and in particular feeding back on what hopefully will come through now. So what gets in the way of your people and property strategy? Maybe nothing gets in the way, I don't know, but open to you. What would help get more collaboration going and really build on those advantages that we've talked about today? You're all very quiet. Oh, I can see people typing though. I mean, from my perspective, I would think, yeah, certainty. Okay, interesting. I think out of a lot of things today, you know, there's a lot about talking to each other about what you all want to achieve, and making sure that you are clear and consistent in what you want to achieve, and how the people aspect, or rather the property aspect, can support that people perspective. And quite rightly, yeah, cost is also coming through. So cost, uncertainty, funding. I know there's a few here who are funded by public money and have funding issues in relation to what they'd aspirationally like to do from a property perspective, but don't have the funding. But grants may be available and such like, and how we can use those to ensure that we're meeting full needs. Okay, I'm conscious of time and it is 11 o'clock. Please do keep tapping away at that. We will take that as a group, and we'll look at that in terms of what we can do to support going forward. Thank you for your engagement. A reminder again about the feedback form. And on that note, we're going to close the session, and thank you very much for your time and attention. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you.